Improving Sustainable Transportation Systems, narrated by Alexander, University of Massachusetts Amherst. An Introduction to Sustainable Transportation Systems. Throughout this presentation, the relationship between transportation systems and greenhouse gas emissions will be analyzed in the hopes to better identify areas in which these systems can become less impactful and more sustainable over time. To do so, we must first explain what do these systems typically look like or aspire to look like. Why are these systems so important in the first place? And how do we plan to achieve these systems? What tools and techniques can be applied to alter their current existing systems to become more sustainable? Firstly, we must understand what sustainable transportation systems look like. Typically, there is no structure or appearance for a sustainable transportation system. However, there are elements which are commonly shared among them. These elements can include such things as improving the well-being of the residents by promoting healthier alternatives of transportation like micromobility functions such as bicycling and walking. Incorporating a more walkable, safe environment which establishes designated public transit opportunities with transportation infrastructure is also a great element which can be found among most sustainable transportation systems. To generalize, transportation systems use a multitude of transportation methods. However, sustainable transportation systems will opt to use those methods which have the least amount of impact on our environment. These methods are typically pedestrian walkway paths as well as designated bike lanes. So why do sustainable transportation systems even matter? Well, according to the Environmental Protection Agency in 2017, an analysis of economic sector of greenhouse gas emissions, transportation is responsible for 29% of the total U.S. emissions. This will be the primary focus of this presentation. However, transportation is also directly related to public health and overall quality of life for residents. Greenhouse gas emissions are a major contributor to our current climate change crisis, and the progression of urban development will only increase these already alarming rates of transit-caused pollutants. Understanding how to best mitigate these emissions, especially within the realms of road transportation, and within that realm, specifically single occupancy vehicles, will better help plan to alter current systems and infrastructures. As you can see from the two charts, the impact the transportation sector has had is dependent on what method of transportation is utilized the most. As you can see, most of the greenhouse gas emissions caused by transportation is sourced from traditional petroleum fuel-based vehicles, and in a majority of cities, that concern grows due to the increasing number of single-occupancy vehicle owners. So how do we plan to better incorporate more sustainable transportation applications within our existing systems? Again, this is a very complex problem which deals with a variety of issues, such as changes in transit infrastructure and influencing personal lifestyle choices. Many people are very attached to the independence which owning a vehicle represents, so attempting to alter the system which promotes that action is bound to be met with contention and disapproval, regardless of its good intentions or otherwise. There is a multitude of tools and techniques which planners have at their disposal to try to implement these sort of changes within their current and future transportation systems. However, the challenge is not only all of these things previously stated, but also the scale at which we must attempt to mitigate these issues. One of the most frequently used tools is zoning. Using zoning, planners can create new districts and zones which can limit or mitigate some forms of transportation which produce these greenhouse gas emissions. This technique can be implemented to help promote more sustainable approaches in specific areas like urban cores and commercial districts. The goal is to be more walkable and less susceptible to issues like traffic congestion and increased emissions from heavy flow rates. Zoning can be influential in promoting more inclusive designs that incorporate the greener methods of travel. However, most common uses of zoning including the Euclidean model, support transportation methods and promote greenhouse gas emissions. Some examples of how zoning policies can be used to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions are such things like lot size requirements, minimum parking spaces, and defining use types of an area, as seen here. One other method which planners have within their arsenal in regards to sustainable planning for transportation is regulations. Regulations can be a very powerful tool when considering the alteration of transportation systems. They can make systems more ecologically efficient and sustainable, just as they have made them more safe, with such things like speed limits and safety belts. Some examples of how regulations can impact greenhouse gas emissions in our transportation systems are things such as setting maximum emission rates for new vehicles, as well as creating more availability for electric vehicle charging and parking spaces. Planners can also use regulations to help establish bike lanes and pedestrian pathways which coincide with traditional transportation roads, or maybe in lieu of traditional transportation roads, with such things seen here. Another example of how regulations can impact our sustainable transportation systems is implementing laws which will create rapid transit systems like bus or rail, making alternative transportation more viable within our communities. Finally, one other tool which planners can use to help create more sustainable transportation systems is incentives. Incentives can be used to help promote methods of transportation which planners want to increase within their communities, such as cycling, pedestrian commuting, and public transit opportunities. By creating these incentives, community members will gain external value from partaking in alternative methods. In doing so, incentivizing the community members will make them more susceptible to changing their current methods of commuting to a more sustainable and less emitting method. Some examples of such incentives are bike share membership discounts, as well as community challenges which promote walking and cycling together instead of traditional methods of commuting by car, as well as incentivizing developers for including more transit availability and design within the likes of on-set parking, so maybe including more areas for bicycles. Finally, cash incentives for better emission-rated vehicles or electric vehicles. In conclusion, altering our transportation systems to become more sustainable will undoubtedly require all three of these techniques to be effective. One consideration regarding the system's change is that the scale of which you apply these changes will be its effective rate and success. Typically speaking, large infrastructure changes are met with contention, and eradicating something as complex as our highway system or road maps is just not feasible overnight. Therefore, in my opinion, the best way to approach these systematic changes in transportation in regarding to sustainability is incrementally and at a rate and level which the community can support and be involved with. As technology continues to impact and influence our society, more and more micromobility options are becoming viable. With that in mind, the increases and shifts away from traditional transportation emissions due to electronic vehicles and these sort of technological advances will help propel the movement of transition from sustainable transportation methods. Along with these increases in opportunity and technologies, another successful application to implement would be a long-term plan which has all of these included within it. Therefore, your overall likelihood would be greater due to current and future examples of how transition might be applied.